Hey everyone, my name is Richie, I'm a filmmaker, and today we're going to be going over my top 3 tips that will get you off to a flying start on the long journey that is mastering After Effects. So, welcome to lockdown day 2,578,000 million, 100,000. It's actually been snowing like crazy here in Scotland the last couple of days, which means that at least we were able to do a bit of this the other day. But other than that, it's very much business as usual in lockdown. However, this does mean that it's a great time to brush up on our filmmaking skills and perhaps learn some new software. So if you're getting into filmmaking and video editing, then learning After Effects is really valuable. It's going to add a lot of extra tools to your arsenal and just let you add that extra bit of spice, a bit of zhuzh to your video productions. When I first started using After Effects, it was primarily as a way to just add explosions to things or make people fly or shoot unconvincing laser beams from their eyes. So there is that side to it too, but over time I realized that there were so many more practical applications it provided that really made learning feel worth it. That's not to say that we don't still love eye lasers. We have love for eye lasers. So I want to share with you my 3 tips that will get you off to a flying start in learning After Effects. Tip number 1, the most useful acronym. Whenever someone has asked me about learning After Effects in the past, this is my go-to tip that I always give because it's so damn useful. It's simply the acronym TRAPS. TRAPS represents all of the letter keybinds that you'll use to control and animate the basic properties of an asset within After Effects. I'll show you how it works. So don't ask me why, but T stands for opacity, which controls how opaque your asset is. R stands for rotation, which will rotate your asset from its anchor point. A stands for anchor point, which allows you to move the point from which your asset rotates or moves. P stands for position, which controls position. And S stands for scale, which is the measure of bigness. Now, by remembering that single word, you now have control over animating the main basic properties of an asset within After Effects. You're able to access these same properties by toggling down the Transform drop-down button, but using the keyboard shortcuts just makes the process that much easier. If you need something to help you remember this, think of learning After Effects like trying to navigate through a jungle, and when you're in the jungle, you have to look out for traps, right? Memory tools. Tip number 2, keyframe interpolation. Like all main non-linear editing software, After Effects uses keyframes to determine changes in your project to make your assets move or change or introduce an effect or whatever other billion things you might want to do. So let's use the position property as an example. Let's say you want to animate this lovely image of Sophie so that she moves from the left side of the frame to the right side of the frame. You'll press P on your keyboard to bring up the asset's position information, where we'll then see the X and Y axis coordinates. When we hit this button here, it will create a keyframe, which basically tells After Effects to take note of these coordinates. Then if we scrub further into the sequence, let's say 3 seconds in, and change our coordinate information so that Sophie is now over this side of the frame, After Effects will detect the change and create a new keyframe containing the new coordinates. So now if we play the clip, we'll see that After Effects will move our image of Sophie from the coordinates of our first keyframe to the coordinates of our second keyframe. And that's the simple principle of keyframe animation. You're simply telling the program, at this time be here, then by this time be here. From here you can stack multiple different elements and keyframes and animations to your wee heart's content, so go nuts. But once you've got your head around the basics of keyframing, you'll want to start to really control how your animation moves. And a great way to do that is by introducing interpolation and using After Effects' Graph Editor feature. Using our earlier example, here we see Sophie moving from position A to position B. But as you can see, the velocity of the movement is constant, and as a result, it looks really mechanical and unreal, and a little bit like a PowerPoint presentation, which is not the look we're going for. Things in real life don't move like this, so your brain sees it and goes, nah. So we can improve this by right-clicking on the keyframe, hovering over the keyframe assistant option, and then choosing the Easy Ease option. Now, when we watch our sequence, the animation still travels from point A to point B within the same time frame, but it will gradually slow down to point B, creating a much more satisfying and realistic motion. To gain further control of this, we can access the graph editor, which you can find by selecting the animated property, in this case position, and then hitting the graph editor button. The graph editor lets us control the levels of velocity we want to assign to an animation by dragging this yellow toggle. If we want the movement to start strong and slowly decay, we'd create this shape in the graph. If we wanted the inverse, where it starts slow and ends strong, we'd do it the other way around. So if I'm animating text in After Effects, perhaps a lower third or title animations, then I always like to play with the keyframe interpolation and the graph editor, as it can go a long way to adding a bit of character and extra dynamism to your animation. Tip number 3, motion blur. Now this is a nice easy one that can often just be the final cherry that you put on top of your beautiful animation sundae just to finish things off. Adding motion blur to your animation is beneficial for the same reasons as discussed earlier on tip number 2, which is about mimicking how our eyes see and process moving objects in the real world. When we see something moving at great speed, unless our eyes are able to perfectly track the object, then we see the moving object with a slight blur. This icon with the 3 circles is the motion blur option. So if we select this box, this tells After Effects that when this asset moves, we want it to have motion blur. Now your animation is that little bit more realistic, and your assets will blur depending on their speed and velocity. It is worth keeping in mind that the motion blur feature is quite processor intensive, so having it toggled on all the time might slow down your editing process. That's why having this master toggle here is so useful, as it can be toggled off while you're animating, and then toggled on for when it's time to render and export your lovely new animation. And there you have it, folks, my top 3 tips for getting you started on your journey to becoming an After Effects wizard who can make things explode, shoot lasers out of their eyes, do all that cool stuff. As I mentioned earlier, I feel like After Effects is one of those programs that's really worth putting in the time to learn, as even having a few basic abilities can really help to elevate your video productions and add an extra level of gloss. So hopefully this video will help to kickstart that process for you. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't already, remember to like and subscribe to keep up with more of my content, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Bye. Bye bye. Put some eye laser then.